So to see this in action, we're going to use the same application that we saw previously, except here, rather than allowing access based on the location of a file, for one of these jar files, we allow access based on who signed it. And the person signing it will be me. So how do we do that? So following the steps, we've already created a jar file. So the next step in that case is to generate the keys. And we generate keys in Java by using a tool called keystore. And our command line looks like this. So here we're saying generate some keys. We store these keys in a key store that in this case is going to be called signer store. And whenever we create keys, we give these keys, if you like, a name. This is called the alias. And in this case, the alias we give these keys is going to be called sign files. So the key store needs a password. So I give it a password here, and we need to enter it again. And then we generate information that's going to go on the certificate that we create here. We're creating a public key, private key pair. That's stored as a certificate, and that certificate needs data. We need to enter that data here. And now that we've entered that data, it asks us for a password for this key. So the original password was for the key store. Now within the key store, we're storing keys, and we can store this with the same password or with a different password. If I just hit enter here, they'll store them with the same password. So once I have that, I can now sign the jar file. So if I go to the out artifacts folder, this is where my jar files are stored. There's a file here called dataaccess.jar, and that's the file I'm going to sign. So we sign the jar file using another tool called jar signer, and that command looks like this. So here we're saying this is the name of the key store. I want to create a signed jar called sdataaccess.jar. The input to this is the file called dataaccess.jar, and I want to use the sign files key that I stored in this key store. And if I do that, it'll ask me for the password, and then it will create the signed jar file for me. And if I do a dir here, we see we have a file called sdataaccess.jar. So here are my jar files, and if I look at inside sdataaccess.jar, and the easiest way to do that is to rename it to a zip file, and look inside here, inside the meta.inf folder, we have these three files. There's a manifest and information about the signing. If I take that manifest file, we can see inside here, it's got information about the signing of the file. So in this case, it says it's got a SHA-256 digest. This is what's being used to sign this code inside here. So the next step was to export the certificate. And we do this again using the key tool. So in this case, we do key tool -export. We specify the name of the key store. We specify the name we gave to the files inside the key store, in this case, sign files. And we also give it this certificate name. So I'm going to call this kevin.cer. Enter the password. And then we have a file called kevin.cer, and there it is. So let's go and try and use this signed jar file. So if I change into the directory where my class files are stored, so I do an ls here, this is where the files are. So there's a com knowledge spike main.class. That's the location of the main runner for this application. So from here, I can try and run the application. So to run this application, we set the class path to be the current directory. We add on the sdataaccess.jar and the services.jar. We apply a security manager, and we apply a policy file. If we take a look at that policy file, at the moment in here, we grant access to service.jar, and we grant access to the class files in the runner folder. So if I try and execute the code here, then we get a security exception. We get an access control exception, and it's telling us we can't write to this file. We can't write a temp message.txt. So what I now need to do is add an entry into this policy file that gives the signed jar file permission to write to this file. So to run this code, I have to do two things. I have to edit the policy file to give sdataaccess permission to access this file. But before we do that, I need to import the certificate into a key store for the receiver. So remember, the certificate is stored in a file called kevin.cer, and the import command, again, is done with key tool. So here I'm going to create a different key store. So we're imagining that the person that created this code is on one machine and we're on a different machine. So we will have different key stores. So in this case, we do an import. We're importing kevin.cer. We're giving the key store name of receiver store. We give a different alias. So we just pick in whatever alias we want for this import. And I'm just going to call this thing Kevin as part of the import. We again need to add a password for our file here. So enter a password for this. This is a new key store. It gives me some information about the certificate. It asks me, do I want to trust it? And I say yes. And again, if I do ls here, we now have a key store called receiver store. Once I have that, I can try running the code again, because we now at least have the certificate in place. Again, it still fails, because again, we haven't yet set up the policy file to trust this code. So in the policy file, we need to add two things. We first of all need to tell the security manager where the key store lives. And that's added with the key store entry in the policy file. And again, we just give it the name of the fully qualified name to the policy file here. So it's in my demos folder and it's called receiver store. JKS at the end here means Java key store. So the type of the key store is a Java key store. There may be other key stores that could be used. Once we have that, we need to add our grant. So the grant in this case is another grant block. So it'll say grant and it'll give write permission to this file. But now rather than saying code base here, we're going to say signed by. And it's signed by, and the value we pass here is the alias that we use to store the key inside this key store. And then once we have that in place, we should now be able to run the code again, and it now works. So now the data access jar file, the S data access jar file, is trusted through the fact that it's been signed. And a simple test to show that it is the S data access jar file would be to go back here and just make this data access.jar and run that, and that code fails because we don't now have an entry for data access.jar inside the policy file. So now that we've seen how to set up signed jar files, in the next module we'll see how to create our own permissions. So even though Java comes with many built-in permissions, they may not be enough. You may need to write your own permission for specific things, and we'll see how we do that.